So we are continuing with the presentation on alpha Abbott's Grifols, turning to the factor 9 product, Profil 9, that was produced by Alpha and Abbott in the 70s and the 80s. The inquiry has not identified any documents to suggest that there was a product license for this product during that time, but there is evidence that it was used in 1984 and 1985 in its heat-treated form, heated in the same way as the factor 8 product through the use of the heptane suspension. In particular, the evidence suggests that that product was used by NHS clinicians because there wasn't an equivalent heat-treated NHS product at that time. The Crever report at page 756 suggests that the heat-treated factor 9 product from Alpha was available from late October in 1984, at least in the States. I won't go through this evidence in detail. We've already heard, and I've given you the references for Dr. Winter's evidence to this inquiry, which was that he was using heat-treated factor 8 and factor 9 for his patients in 1984. A memo from the 7th of May 1985 from Dr. Lane noted that Dr. Kernoff at the Royal Free was evaluating Alpha's heat-treated factor 9 at that stage. The reference is CBLA 302159, so that's May 1985. A later letter from Alpha to Professor Bloom recorded that the Cardiff Centre had received batches of heat-treated Profil 9 between June and October 1985, CVHB 602_050. And Dr. Jones at the Newcastle Centre stated in a document from 1990 that he had used Profil 9 and Co9 in 1985 as no heat-treated NHS product was available. That is PJON 40104_001. In May 1992, Alpha applied for a product license for a solvent detergent-treated factor 9 product, which was known as Alpha 9 at that stage. I think it had previously been referred to as Pure 9. The documents suggest that the license was granted subject to some conditions. MHRA 307156 and MHRA 307149. I don't intend to say anything more about the Alpha 9, about the factor 9 products, sir. Turning to plasma sources and plasma donors, we have covered some of this ground as we went through the licensing and the viral inactivation documents yesterday, for example, the donor pool sizes and the introduction of some of the testing. There are some other documents to which I would like to draw your attention in terms of plasma sources and donors. And if we could begin with an article published in 1979, but looking back at what Alpha had done in the 1970s in terms of testing, in particular for hepatitis B surface antigen. The reference is BAYP 5021_003. And the article comes from the publication Clinical Therapeutics, Volume 2, Number 5, from 1979. It is written by Clyde Macaulay and Kay Noel of Alpha, and it is entitled HBsAg Testing in Commercial Plasmapheresis. The article details the different tests introduced by Alpha during the 70s. It notes that Alpha introduced screening for all plasma donations for hepatitis B surface antigen in January 1971. David Bell, in his witness statement of the 2nd of February 2021, to which we referred yesterday, said that this was done, I said by Alpha, of course it was by Abbott at this time. He says that this was done by Abbott a year before it was mandated by the FDA. The article goes on to say, I won't bring it up, but it's page 4, that in April 1973, it says Alpha Therapeutic Corporation, but I think we should understand that to mean Abbott at the time, replaced the initial test, which was a counter-immunoelectrophoresis test, with the first generation Alzria 1 test, so an RIA test, in April 1973. Then a second generation test, Alzria 2, was introduced in February 1975. The article describes the effect that these tests had, and it does it both in prose and by reference to a figure, a graph. I'm going to ask if we could have both of those on screen, please, Shumik. So if we could have page 5 on one side of the screen and page 6 of the article on the other side. We can see the graph there, or the figure, and on the left-hand margin, left-hand axis, we can see that it says reactive rates per 1,000 donations, and then on the horizontal axis, you have the different years, starting from 1971, going up to 1979. You can see how the years are split up according to the tests. So the first generation CEP test is the first block marked by diagonal lines. The Alzria 1 first generation RIA test is marked by the speckled dots, and the Alzria 2 tests by the crossed hatchings. And if we could return that to its pain, thank you, Shumik, we will then, I will read through what is said in the article, and people can perhaps look at the graph and see the particular spikes that it is referring to. The second paragraph down of page 5, the authors write this, and I quote, "The first period of counter-immunoelectrophoresis testing during 1971 and 1972 indicated a relatively stabilized donor population. Transition from the counter-immunoelectrophoresis test to the radioimmune assay technique in April 1973 was marked by an enormous increase in the number of antigen-positive donations detected." I pause there, sir. That is very visible in the figure. It is that spike at the point of April 1973 in the graph. Consistent with increased sensitivity of the radioimmune assay technique, a substantial number of donors were rejected in the ensuing 5 months. A subsequent slight rise in reactive rate during the first quarter of 1974 was attributed to the introduction of a modified version of the Alzria test. As noted previously, the test modification involving shorter incubation periods at elevated temperature greatly increased the test specificity. Again, after the first few months of test introduction, during which time previously unidentified HBsAg positive donors were excluded from the plasmapheresis program, the incidence of hepatitis B antigenemia in the donor population stabilized. The introduction of the Alzria 2 test in February 1975 has allowed for most sensitive detection of antigen-positive donations. Pausing there, sir, the story is one of the new test being introduced, there being an increase in the return of positive donations because the new test is more sensitive, those donors being excluded, and therefore the figures becoming more stabilized as time went on.
I don't quite understand the reference in the article to the introduction of the Alzria 1 being having a greatly increased specificity. That wouldn't explain a higher reactive rate, would it? Because the higher the reactive rate is sensitivity, isn't it?
The distinction, as I understand it, between sensitivity and specificity
Sensitivity may lead to a number of false positives. It eliminates false negatives. Specificity is the other way around.
Yes, but as I understand it, perhaps I would suggest...
You can come back to me on that.
I think that it may be that the term sensitivity isn't necessarily being used in contradistinction to specificity in this article. It may be that it is...
So they're not using the lingo that we're used to from our experts.
I suspect that's right. And
right.
I think it is. It should be read as meaning that this test is better at detecting hepatitis B surface antigen than the previous test.
So it should be sensitivity rather than specificity.
It's certainly that would be the...
I mean, that seems to be the sense of it, but yes. It's just the word, which puzzles me.
Yes, I haven't seen the word specificity used in this article.
If you, in the course of the next day or so, anyone gives you a better suggestion for what it means, then let me know.
I will do. In the discussion section, the authors go on to say this, it's at the bottom of page 5. In reviewing the reactive donation rate, and on to the next column, it is essential to take into account the test turnaround time. Until the use of the courier service was introduced in September 1975, there was a 1-week turnaround time in the radioimmunoassay testing program. Because a plasmapheresis donor may contribute plasma twice weekly, the hepatitis B surface antigen reactive donor contributed an average of 1.7 donations before being excluded from the plasmapheresis program. As noted previously, all reactive donations are excluded from the manufacturing process. The authors are raising this to explain the statistical steps that they took in the article to account for this lag in time. But I flag it to you, sir, for the different purpose of indicating that up until September 1975, when a donor was found to be hepatitis B surface antigen positive, on average, that donor would have given 1.6 donations before being excluded from the program. There is nothing in the articles to suggest that retrospective steps were taken to remove that donor's previous donations from the plasma pool. It is prospective that the donor is thereafter excluded. From September 1975, there was a quicker turnaround. We could go down to the about 2/3 of the way down that right-hand column, the sentence beginning during the period, the final paragraph. Thank you. So second sentence into this paragraph. During the period of counter-immunoelectrophoresis testing, the average annual reactive rates per 1,000 donations were 2.1, January through to December 1971, and 2.4, January through March 1973. From April through December 1973, concomitant with the introduction of radioimmunoassay testing, the reactive rate increased to an annual average of 9 per 1,000 donations, reflecting a peak of 31.7 per 1,000, stabilizing to 4 per 1,000 by the last third of the year. We go over to page 6, please, on the left-hand screen. I think actually we can take the graph down and we could just, go to page 7, my error, page 7. This marked increase represents the detection of formerly unidentified hepatitis B surface antigen reactive donors.
Thank you.
In addition to antigen reactive new donors. So if I pause there, the RAA test, as one would expect, is picking up both new donors who are hepatitis B surface antigen and who will be excluded from the program, and donors who had previously donated who were hepatitis B surface antigen positive but had not been detected by the previous test. Returning to the article, and I quote, Since the implementation of the modified Alzheimer procedures, the corrected annual reactive rates per 1,000 donors have stabilised at 1.2 to 1.4. In good agreement with the new donor reactive rate observed in community service volunteer blood centres, nearly 90% of Alpha Therapeutic Corporation's reactive donations are attributed to new donors. These donations were never used in the manufacture of plasma products, and as mentioned previously, these donors were summarily excluded from the regular plasmapheresis program. Thus, the reactive rate within Alpha Therapeutic Corporation's continually tested plasmapheresis donor population may be estimated as 0.12 to 0.14 per 1,000. The reactive donation rate of 1.2 to 1.4 per 1,000, which the Alpha Therapeutic Corporation's plasmapheresis has maintained since April 1974, and I pause to note that this article is now 1979, so a 5-year period, is comparable to the rate of 1.5 per 1,000 reported for a volunteer whole blood donation program, and it cites a couple of sources in respect of that figure, and says, thus the comparative reactive donor rates indicate that in a well-run commercial plasmapheresis program, the incidence of hepatitis B surface antigen reactive donors is not significantly different from that reported in a volunteer whole blood donation program. The reference to the volunteer program is to the US volunteer program. The point made previously in that paragraph is that 90% of the positive donations are for new donors who are excluded and therefore haven't entered into the Alpha or the Abbott process, but 10% are previous donors. That is all that I take from that article, sir, but you will be aware, of course, that you have heard considerable evidence from individuals about how they were infected with hepatitis B and non-A, non-B hepatitis during the 1970s as a result of the use of blood products. A further point to be made about that article is that it concerns plasmapheresis centres that were run by Alpha. And as we have seen and will see, Alpha also used plasma that was obtained from contractors and also used plasma which was recovered from whole blood donations in the voluntary sector, although whether or not that plasma went into blood products that were used to treat factor VIII patients in the UK is a different matter. We don't have much further evidence about the available sources of Abbott's US plasma in the 1970s, but there is one document which indicates that Abbott had received plasma from Central America, specifically Nicaragua, during that period. If we could have BAYP 303777. This is a letter dated the 15th of October 1975, and it comes from the plasmapheresis, the Centro Americano de Plasmapheresis company in Nicaragua. It is sent by Guillermo B. Castro, whose position title is responsible head, and it is sent to the director of the Bureau of Biologics in the United States. The letter states this: we hereby request authorization to ship 15,434 litres of fresh frozen human plasma collected from normal donors to Cutter Laboratories in California. The use of this plasma will be for manufacturing purposes into human injectable materials. The tentative port of entry of this product shall be San Francisco, California, through air freight. And this is the relevant paragraph for our purposes. I quote, we already have been authorized by you to make this same shipment to Abbott Laboratories with tentative port of entry Los Angeles, California, kindly see attached a copy of your letter of authorization dated 31st of July 1975. We wish to inform you that such shipment did not take place, as Abbott Laboratories informed us at the time they were overstocked. And the letter to which reference was made is at page 2. No, apologies, that is not the letter. But the point of this paragraph is that Abbott had made an arrangement to obtain blood or obtain plasma from Nicaragua. They hadn't, in the event, gone through with it on that instance because they were overstocked. We don't know whether or not a shipment was made at another time, nor do we know to what purpose any plasma from Nicaragua was put. As you will recall, sir, from the UK licenses, the application of August 1974 expressly stated that the blood used was obtained from plasmapheresis of commercial donors at 8 centres within the United States. And there was a variation application in January 1975 that added a further 9 centres, all within the United States. Now, of those 17 centres, it seems that 16 were identified as being part of a company that Alpha itself owned and ran, but 1 centre was part of a different company, and we don't know who had control of that company or the extent of any influence that Alpha had over it. Turning to the 1980s, the president of Alpha gave a speech or a talk in February 1980. It's a man called Thomas C. Dries. If we could have IPSN 40328_008. We don't have much context for when this talk was given. The principal purpose of it was a discussion of the plasma industry worldwide and obtaining data about it. I won't go into that. What I will draw your attention to is the second section of the speech on page 2, please, which talks about, can the volunteer blood system replace the paid plasma system? A series of calculations are given in the speech, the nub of which is that in order to replace paid plasma in the United States, it would be necessary to increase the proportion of the population voluntarily donating from 3% to 19%. Mr. Deese points out the difficulties that the US Red Cross have had in publicising and attracting donors, and goes on to say, this is at the top of page 3, the first full sentence there, please. I submit this is impossible, and the effort would not be worth the cost to the American public for a phony moral issue. The true moral issue in paid versus volunteer blood is simply, is there an adequate, safe, cost-effective supply of blood and plasma? If the controversy reduces the supply, then the cause of the controversy is immoral. That was the position put by Mr. Dries. If we could turn to page 4 of this document, just on a slightly different point, but one of interest. He addresses the suggestion, which seems to have been made in the United States at the time, that exporting anti-haemophilic factors caused high prices in the US, a source of concern for patients within the US. Mr. Dries denies that this is the case and says actually the higher prices which are obtainable overseas in effect, subsidize the cost in the United States. He gives some prices. We can see that in the second paragraph. He refers to the high prices in West Germany, 43 cents. Japan, 40 cents. It's written US, but I think this must be a reference to the UK. UK, 17 cents. Sweden, 60 cents. Italy, 35 cents. And Spain, 43 cents. Those all subsidize the low prices in the US of 12 cents. If I'm correct in thinking that there is a typographical error and the first reference to the US is to the UK, we can see that that figure is, of course, higher than the 12 cents of the United States, but significantly lower than the prices in West Germany, Japan, Sweden, Italy, and Spain. I turn now to the subject of advertisements and efforts to recruit gay donors. We have discussed this over the last couple of weeks and the significance of gay donors for providing hepatitis B immune globulin. And the question of whether or not plasma obtained from those donors was also used in the manufacture of factor VIII. If we could have on screen, please, UCSF 5058, please, Shumi. This is the front cover of a magazine called Advocate, which describes itself as the National Gay News Magazine. This, as we understand it, is an edition from the 9th of July, 1981. If we could go, please, to page 4 of the document. And on the left-hand side, the second entry down, headlined, "Every healthy adult should be a plasma donor." We can see that this is an advert placed by Alpha Plasma Centres. You can see that at the bottom left-hand corner. And the advert says this, and I quote, "Help us help people who need plasma. Every healthy adult should be a plasma donor. It's a two-way street. You help us meet the growing demand for plasma, and we'll help you earn extra income. Join us. Be a plasma donor. Did you know that plasma is desperately needed by the sick and injured every day? For burn, shock, and accident victims, haemophiliacs, and others, plasma can mean the difference between life and death." The address of a plasma center is given, 973 Mission, San Francisco. And then it says, "Bring this ad for new donor bonus." So plainly an advertisement directed at gay donors from 1981. If we could go over to page 6, please. Another advert, which we understand to be from the same publication. And the advert this time reads, it's the one on the top right-hand corner. This time it reads, "Chances are you've got hepatitis or were exposed to it. If you're an active gay, you have an extremely high chance of getting hepatitis. This disease can cripple you for months. It can hurt you and everyone around you for a lifetime. It might even kill you. Yes, hepatitis is a serious disease, but now there is something you can do to stop it. Help develop the anti-hepatitis vaccine. At Alpha Plasma Centres, we are collecting plasma for use in the development of a hepatitis vaccine that may one day stop hepatitis dead in its tracks. You or anyone you know who's had hepatitis can help in our research by contacting an Alpha Plasma Centre. At Alpha, giving this plasma is fast, easy, and safe. We'll pay you cash if your plasma is acceptable. We will give you a free blood test to find out if you qualify. Please consider the danger of hepatitis in our community. Your blood may hold the factors we're searching for. So contact your Alpha Plasma Centre today. And then a list of Alpha Plasma Centres with contact details, including phone numbers, is given. Finally, if we could have CGRA 40294 _ 074. This advert reads as follows: hepatitis B. Have you ever had hepatitis B or a positive test? Your blood may be valuable for making a new vaccine. Cash paid per donation, free confidential testing available. For more information, contact the nearest Alpha Plasma Centre, and then 5 centres are listed there in different cities in Texas. As we have previously seen and discussed, in August 1982, Dr. Dennis Donoghue of the Office of Biologics of the FDA approached commercial fractionators to seek a voluntary agreement to cease using plasma collected from targeted gay donors in the production of factor VIII concentrate. If we could have BAUM 608, please, on screen. This is a document that we have looked at before. It is dated the 30th of August 1982. It is a Qatar document, which is referring to Dr. Donoghue's request to Qatar, which has also been made to other pharmaceutical companies. And it is recording what appear to be discussions with others at other pharmaceutical companies about what their position is. So it is Qatar's understanding of what is happening at Highland and at Alpha. We looked at the Highland section before, and what the document records in the second paragraph is this. Highland, Mike Riddell, has had a policy that any plasma collected from a donor having a history of hepatitis, the disease, hepatitis B surface antigen positive, or in close association with others having the disease, are excluded from the use in the manufacture of anti-hemophilic fraction. Currently, Highland collects plasma from homosexuals for anti-HBS, but does not use it in their fractionation. It is sold to Alpha. Mike has told Donoghue that he thinks Highland excludes homosexual plasma from AHF, but he wanted to check their procedures before making a solid voluntary commitment. My guess is that Highland will make the commitment. The memorandum goes on. Alpha Therapeutics, Penny Carr, has just returned from Washington and had not met with her management, Hartin and Dries. She will make the recommendation that they voluntarily exclude all anti-HBS plasma, almost exclusively collected from homosexuals, from coagulation components. Penny believes that the commitment should be voluntary rather than via a written request from BOB, that's the Bureau of Biologics, because the latter could have political repercussions and could be difficult to amend and would ultimately create concerns and problems with both the homosexual and haemophilic populations. So there is an expectation in that document that Alpha are going to give a voluntary commitment, but the document doesn't necessarily address what Alpha was doing in the past, save that it notes that Highland appear to be selling plasma from gay donors to Alpha. If we could now turn, please, to CGRA 40277. This is a letter from Marietta Carr, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, presumably the Penny Carr who was referred to in the previous document, which is sent to Harry M. Mayer, the Director of the National Centre for Drugs and Biologics. in the FDA. The letter is dated the 30th of August 1982. What it states is this, and I quote, "The purpose of this letter is to inform you that until further notice, Alpha Therapeutic Corporation will not be using the cryoprecipitated material from plasma from hepatitis B surface antibody donors in the manufacture of antihemophilic factor (human). Such plasma is used by Alpha in the manufacture of hepatitis B immune globulin (human). So a prospective commitment not to do it until further notice, but no comment on what was done before. We could have CGRA 40657, please. It's a further letter from Margrietta Carr, again to Mr. Mayer, dated the 7th of September 1982. This letter, Marietta Carr states, "We are in receipt of the Office of Biologics August the 20th, 1982 letter approving our procedure for the immunization of donors with licensed hepatitis B vaccine. This letter stated that plasma obtained from donors with a history of hepatitis may be used only for the production of hepatitis B immune globulin or in vitro diagnostics." So that's using it to diagnose infections in a laboratory setting. Going back to the letter, I quote, "As we stated in an August 30th, 1982 letter to you, we have voluntarily suspended until further notice the use of cryoprecipitated material from hepatitis B surface antibody donors in the manufacture of antihemophilic factor (human). However, we know of no reason why plasma from such donors should not continue to be used in the manufacture of normal serum albumin (human), or plasma protein fraction (human). Therefore, we will continue to utilize plasma from hepatitis B surface antigen donors in the manufacture of normal serum albumin or plasma protein fraction." So the plasma from donors, particularly gay donors who have been targeted in order to make the hepatitis B immune globulin, will continue to be used, suggesting that it has been used before, in albumin and plasma protein fraction, presumably on the basis that there are viral inactivation techniques connected with those products. The use in antihemophilic factors, so factor 8 and factor 9, is stated to be suspended. Can we have, please, CGRA 40262? This is a letter from Thomas C. Dries, the man whose speech we looked at a little while ago, and it is sent to the National Haemophilia Foundation, the, at that time, major haemophilia charity in the United States. What Dr. Dries says is this. It's sent specifically to Mr. Charles J. Carman, the chairman of the board, and Mr. Louis Aladort, the medical co-director of the National Haemophilia Foundation. What the letter says is this, and I quote, "Gentlemen, I was pleased to receive your recent letter of November the 2nd, 1982, but was distressed with the bad news. Alpha has never used plasma from homosexuals, intravenous drug abusers, or recent Haitian emigres. We have no centers in Florida, New York, Los Angeles, or San Francisco, and do not buy plasma from these areas. We have always avoided drug abusers, and while we have purchased some plasma collected from homosexuals for hepatitis B gamma and vaccine, we have never used it to make antihemophilic fraction. We also think that plasma from prisons should be avoided." goes on to say that they agree with the proposed restrictions that have been suggested by the National Haemophilia Foundation.
If one just goes back for a moment, bearing in mind that it says we have no centres in Florida, New York, Los Angeles, or San Francisco, to something you showed me a moment or two ago, UCSF 5058.
Page 4.
Page 4. The address says 973 Mission, San Francisco.
It does, sir. We understand that comes from July 1981.
Yes, the centre may have closed.
Yes.
In between, but this certainly is targeting people in San Francisco to give their plasma, and it was a centre in San Francisco, just in case it might be thought that the letter was suggesting there never had been plasma in the system, which came from those centres.
That's correct, sir. If we could go to page 6, I don't know, my copy won't allow me to see where the listed centres are, but if we could go to page 6 of that document.
It refers to the 973 Mission, San Francisco. You can work it out looking fourth line up.
Yes, San Francisco.
973 Mission Street, San Francisco, CA.
I'm afraid my eyesight won't allow me to work out what
it's not very clear, but that I think is what it says.
Yes, I'm very confident about that one because we have the previous address. I was just seeing as I scanned down whether or not there is any reference to a sentence in Florida, New York, or Los Angeles. I'm afraid I can't make out clearly what the other centres are.
It's very difficult to work that out. The head office was in Los Angeles, wasn't it?
Yes, but whether or not that was also meant that there was a plasma centre.
It may not have been a collection centre,
yes.
But it certainly was the head office.
Yes, but certainly those two adverts demonstrate that as of 1981, there was a centre that was in San Francisco.
Yes. And that it was active or intended to be active at the time.
Yes, yes. The phrasing of Dr. Dries' letters is, we have no centres in Florida, New York, Los Angeles, or San Francisco as of 9th of November 1982.
Yes.
Trying to bring together those documents, it's not possible to give you a comprehensive picture, I'm afraid. But there does seem to be evidence of the following. First, Alpha actively advertised for gay donors, and as we have seen, that included in the San Francisco area. Second, plasma from those donors was used in the production of hepatitis B immune globulin, and this was approved by the FDA. Third, there is evidence that Alpha also purchased plasma from gay donors from Highland. Fourth, that as of August and September 1982, Alpha gave a prospective commitment not to use plasma in the manufacture of factor 8 and factor 9 concentrates. However, fifth, they reserved the right to use it in albumin or plasma protein fraction products. And sixth, the president of the company informed the National Haemophilia Foundation in November 1982 that Alpha had never used such plasma in anti-haemophilia fractions. That's, I'm afraid, as far as we are able to take it at this stage.
Thank you.
Turning to prisons, the document that we have just looked at from Dr. Dries contained the sentence, "We also think that plasma from prisons should be avoided." That is from the 9th of November 1982. If we could have on screen, please, CGRA 40376. This is a document dated the 15th of December 1982, and it is directed from the sales department of Alpha to its sales force regional managers. And it is a document which is about AIDS and gives some facts that the regional managers should know. We will be coming back, of course, to the question of how the company and other companies responded to the threat of AIDS in November. For present purposes, the second point down in the some facts you should know is the relevant one. It states, quotes, "There is a large homosexual population in the penal institutions. Alpha does not collect plasma from penal institutions." The present tense is used there, sir. I don't know if that has any significance, I'm afraid. On the 22nd of December 1982, Alpha's US medical director, Dr. Clyde McCauley, wrote to US haemophilia centres regarding AIDS. This is at CGRA 40265, please. You can see the date there, 22nd of December 1982, and the addressees. If we go down, please, to the third paragraph, the underlined section there, Dr. McCauley said, and I quote, "We do not operate prisoner donor centres which have a large high-risk population, nor do we purchase plasma from prisons." Again, the present tense is used. I don't know if there is a significance to that. While we are on this document, if we could just go to the previous paragraph, gives us some insight into how Alpha had approached its donor checks before. Dr. McCauley wrote, and I quote, "Alpha has always checked potential donors for temperature, fever, weight loss, and other physical signs which now are suspected of being symptomatic of AIDS. Wherever we find a potential risk factor, we will decline to accept plasma from that donor. This action is consistent with our policy to do all we can to ensure patient safety in using our plasma products." So that is the information that we have, sir, about the use of prison plasma. In November, we will hear more about the steps that were taken by Alpha and other pharmaceutical companies in response to the threat of AIDS. Alpha were one of the first companies to instigate a donor screening program, specifically addressing some of the risk factors of AIDS and seeking to exclude high-risk donors. They did that from December 1982. It may be that they were the first company to do that. Of interest for present purposes is the effect of that donor screening program. On the 14th of January 1983, an Alpha representative, or several representatives, attended a large National Haemophilia Foundation meeting alongside other pharmaceutical manufacturers. The note of this meeting, I won't take you to it, but the reference is CGRA 40327, recorded that in the first 3 weeks of Alpha's new screening process, 308 people had been excluded. That screening process was focused on male donors who had had sexual contact with a man, people from Haiti, and those who used intravenous drugs. According to the Creva report, those 308 alpha donors who had been excluded as a result of the questions that they had, the answers they had given to questions in the donor screening program, came from a total of 6,000 to 7,000 donors who had been questioned during approximately 3 weeks about high-risk behavior. So 308 out of about 6,000 to 7,000. Alpha published newsletters periodically, and the summer 1983 newsletter stated that in the first 6 months of the donor screening program, 800 potential donors had voluntarily disqualified themselves from the donor pool. The reference to that is CGRA 40665_001. What those figures don't tell us is how many of those donors were first-time donors and how many had given previous donations. If we could have on screen, please, CGRA 40241. This is on a slightly different but related point. This is a Alpha memorandum from the 25th of January 1983. It's entitled AIDS Plasma Risk. It's from Bob Rivet and sent to Dave Gurry. It provides an overview of the sources for the company's expected plasma collection in 1983. It's helpful for our purposes to see where they were getting their plasma from, although I stress that the fact that the company was obtaining plasma from a particular source does not mean that that plasma was necessarily being used in the production of Factor VIII products, still less that it was being used in Factor VIII products that were marketed in the United Kingdom. But it does help us to understand where the company was getting its plasma at that time. What is recorded in this memorandum is this. Point 1, we will receive 900,000 kilograms of plasma from Alpha donor centres. At 666 millilitres per donation, this represents about 1.35 million donations. 2, we will receive 200,000 kilograms from contract centres, or about 300,000 donations. 3, in the above cases, the average donor donates 15 times per year. 4, the annual donor population at Alpha is 89,000 individuals, and in contract centres, 20,000. 5, we are planning to receive 100,000 kilograms of recovered fresh frozen plasma, RFFP, from blood banks. At 250 millilitres per donation, this represents 400,000 individuals, since there are few repeat donations. This results in the following picture. Source, and we can see the table here. Source is in the left-hand column, then kilograms provided of plasma, the number of donations in the next column, then the number of donors in the column that follows, and the percentage of donors. So we can see that there are 3 sources: the Alpha centres, contract centres, and recovered fresh frozen plasma from blood banks. The biggest per volume by some distance is the 900,000 kilograms obtained at Alpha centres, compared to 200,000 from contract centres and 100,000 from recovered fresh frozen plasma. That is also reflected in the number of donations at the Alpha centres, 1.35 million compared to 300,000 and 400,000 from a contract and the recovered fresh frozen plasma. But the donors figure shows that 89,000 donors provided the 1.35 million donations at the Alpha Centre, so that's 17.5% of the donors. 3.5% of the donors contributed to the contract plasma, and 78.6% of the donors contributed to the recovered fresh frozen plasma. And the reasons for that are that the donations are smaller, 250 millilitres per donation, and there are few repeat donations, by which I understand to mean that people who go to the blood banks tend to donate once per year, and rather than the 15 times per year that those at the Alpha Centre on average provide. The final paragraph of the memorandum states this: it would appear that if the assumptions are correct, we will have 78.6% of our total donors contributing to only 10% of our plasma. One could conclude that it is important to take all steps possible to ensure that this large segment be carefully screened to avoid plasma from high-risk individuals. That is the end of the memorandum. It is written, of course, at a time when the Alpha had introduced its screening programs within its own centres. The memorandum appears to be pointing out the danger of the risk involved in the fact that a large number of donors, 78.6% of the donors, weren't coming from Alpha centres, but were coming from blood banks. And in addition, 3.5% were coming from contractors. Could we have on screen, please, BPLL 301351_122. This document, we believe, dates from the 31st of May 1983. And it is from David J. Guri, who was the recipient of the previous memorandum. And it is sent to Joe Komoto of the Green Cross Corporation in Osaka, Japan, the ultimate owner of Alpha. It is entitled AIDS Report for discussion with the Japanese Ministry of Health on June the 6th, 1983, which is why we believe that it comes from May 1983. I won't take you through the whole documents. Maybe one that we return to in November. For present purposes, it's just page 4, item 3, to which I will draw your attention. What Mr. Guri wrote there is, and I quote, "For plasma obtained from blood banks, Alpha's specifications were changed." It says
probably requiring, is it?
I suspect it's requiring. Requiring that plasma collected after January the 1st, 1983, be from donors screened in the same manner as those at Alpha's plasma centres. At first, this was applied to all plasma. Later in January, it was reduced to apply only to plasma to be used in the manufacturing of anti-haemophilic fraction, since other products are subject to heat treatment. The result of this requirement was a severe reduction in plasma procurement from blood banks, as blood banks at this point in time refused to follow Alpha's lead and would not follow the screening requirements until forced to by regulations from the Office of Biologics on March the 24th, 1983, recommendations that we will come back to in due course. What can be taken from this in terms of what was done before January 1st, 1983, would be or at least the inference that I take from it, is that Alpha did not control the processes that were being used in the blood banks for donor screening before that time. And when they introduced or required that similar processes be introduced in January 1983, the contributions from blood banks dropped off.
So, just going back to the letter which Mr. Dries wrote to the National Haemophilia Foundation on the 9th of November 1982, CGRA 40262. Alpha has never used plasma from homosexuals, intravenous drug abusers, or recent Haitian emigres. If at that time Alpha was receiving fresh frozen plasma from blood banks, recovered fresh frozen plasma, then they would have no way of knowing.
They would have no way of knowing, save for whatever information was provided with the blood banks, by the blood banks to them. But the large scale of donations and donors.
And if blood banks were supplying them, then in the same manner as they had been supplying in early January through to March of 83, the implication from the letter you've just shown me at BPLL on the AIDS report, essentially, is that there were a number of potentially of high-risk groups. The blood banks weren't prepared to ask and find out.
Yes. I would point out that in his letter, Dr. Dries says that the specific groups highlighted, the Haitians, gay donors, prison donors, weren't used in the production of anti-haemophilic fraction. But the letter that I have just read says that first, the requirements that were placed on the blood banks were applied to all plasma, but later in January it was reduced to apply only to plasma to be used in the manufacturing of anti-haemophilic fraction. So it does appear that as of January 1983, blood bank plasma was being used in the production of anti-haemophilic fraction.
Yes, the result of this requirement was a severe reduction.
Yes, yes.
But you don't have documents to show me is the extent to which, prior to January the 1st, 1983, Alpha was taking from blood banks.
No. I would note that the previous document that I showed you, which showed the figures, the anticipated figures for 1983, made no reference to any dramatic changes that were anticipated in the supply at that time.
Yep.
The further point that I don't have information on, save for the documents that were provided with the license applications in 1974 and 1975, is whether the plasma that was obtained from blood banks was used in Factor VIII products that were provided to the UK market. Certainly the applications in 1974 and 1975 would indicate that it was not, and if the license were granted on that basis, then unless the license was varied, it would not have been open to the company to have used plasma from other than the 17 centres that were listed in such production. But we don't have a full set of all of the licensing documentation regarding Profilate. So that is all I intend to say for now about the issue of donors. There may be, I understand that a document has been forwarded to us while I've been speaking. I'll have a look at that during a break to see if it sheds any more light, particularly on the San Francisco centres.
Yes, I think that there's a reference somewhere to the recently closed San Francisco Centre.
That is the document which has been forwarded to.
That may be CGRA 40599.
December 1982, from E. Healy, or Mealy perhaps, PhD, an Alpha employee sent to the executive committee. We can see Dr. Drees's name there, copied to others, including Mr. Guri and Penny Carr. And it's AIDS meeting December the 15th, 1982. So, point 1C. If plasma is on hand from our recently closed San Francisco Centre, there is no reason it should not be used.
Yes.
15th of December, 1982. Thank you, Sheila. A few further references, sir, to give you about Alpha Abbott. I won't bring any of these documents up. There is some evidence that Alpha and Green Cross expressed an interest in establishing a fractionation plant in the United Kingdom in circa 1979 to 1980. We've seen similar documents from other companies. The references are DHSC 302197 _ 170, and then the same stem _ 166 and _ 164. And we know, of course, that ultimately that wasn't pursued. And then a couple of documents on financial donations to finish with. The minutes of the 14th of April 1986 Reference Centre Directors meeting note that Alpha had agreed to provide funds for the October 1986 annual general meeting of the Haemophilia Centres Directors Organisation. No figure was given in those minutes. The reference is HCDO 40420. We also have an undated letter regarding funding by pharmaceutical companies in the 1970s and the 1980s, which appears to relate to the Lothian Health Board. That records a donation of £6,500 from Alpha in 1986 to 1987, and another of £1,000 in 1987 to 1988. Those references are STHB 40220. And finally, from June 2002, Dr. Hill wrote to Ian Marshall of Alpha UK on behalf of the UK HCDO, seeking a donation towards the organisation's database. And that reference is HCDO 40264 _ 057. That concludes the presentation on Alpha, Abbott and Grifols for the present time, and that concludes this round of presentations on pharmaceutical companies. As you know, we will be coming back in November to look at the response to risk of those companies, and in particular, the response to the risk of AIDS. There are, of course, many other issues arising from the pharmaceutical companies that we will keep in mind and may explore further as the inquiry progresses.
Thank you.
The next course is to turn to some presentations from Ms. Richards on various haemophilia centres. I note the time, sir, and wonder whether...
Well, we'll do that after we've had a break, and starting at 20 to 12. 20 to 12.